A round of applause greeted my next guest as he announced news of Donald Trump's election victory to Russia's parliament.
Dear friends and colleagues, 3 minutes ago, Hillary Clinton admitted defeat in the United States election. A second later, Trump began his speech as President-elect of the United States, and I congratulate you all.
That was Russian State Duma Deputy Vyacheslav Nikhanov earlier today. The reaction of fellow Russian lawmakers, though, is hardly surprising given Trump's praise of Putin during the election campaign and vice versa, including the Russian media's high praise of Donald Trump. So what does this all mean for the future of U.S.-Russian relations at this time of heightened tension? I asked the Russian deputy just moments ago when he joined me from our bureau in Moscow. Mr. Nikhanov, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us from Moscow tonight.
Hello, Christian.
Is it true to say, is it fair to say that you are all leaping up and down, very, very happy with this U.S. election result?
Well, I would not express my feelings as happiness. I think the American people should be happy electing the new president, but I think we have a sense of relief, actually, because with Hillary Clinton, we expected troubles in the bilateral relations, which are not very useful for both our two countries and for the whole world, since we are serious military powers. So I think the general mood here is more positive than a couple of days ago, though many in Russia predicted that outcome, unlike the American press or American experts.
Yes, and you will sort of admit, though, won't you, that your press was full of praise and paeans and homage to Donald Trump. And I just want to ask you what you meant when you said to the Duma today, I congratulate you all on this result. Those were your words today.
Actually, I didn't say that. I was actually the only one in the room. We had a plenary meeting of the Duma who was following the election results, the election night on the CNN. And as soon as Hillary Clinton admitted her defeat, and the very second then Donald Trump started his address, I asked for a minute and said, I just got a news that Donald Trump has become president of the United States. My congratulations. And there was some noise. I wouldn't call it applause, actually.
I see.
So I just informed my colleagues about the outcome of the U.S. election.
There was applause, and certainly the translation said that you congratulated all your colleagues. But anyway, let's move beyond that. You described what you don't like about Hillary Clinton. What do you like about Donald Trump? And I mean, how do you see the U.S. relationship developing with Russia under President Trump? What is it about his stated policies that you think you can work with?
Well, actually, I would not say that I like Donald Trump. I'm just cautiously optimistic about the prospects of relations between our two countries. Donald Trump was pretty consistent in saying that he wants positive relationship. He said not once that America overcommitted itself, that America is not going to interfere militarily in every conflict around the world, which I think positive, that America will not add to its military bases abroad, and there are around 400 now American military bases around Russia. He said that it is possible to cooperate with Russia on ISIS, on Syria, and I think there are very good prospects for such cooperation, and that is a very, very bad news for the terrorists. And in general, he was in speaking mood with Russia. He will not fear to negotiate, to use the words of John F. Kennedy.
Could I ask you what precisely you're expecting? Because, yes, he has said many things, including intimating Russia's own view that it deserves its own quote-unquote sphere of influence. I guess I'm asking you, do you expect him not to be so adamant about Russia having to redress the balance of what's been going on in Crimea or what's been going on in eastern Ukraine? And as you know very well, Secretary of State John Kerry has been over and above, indefatigable, trying to engage with Russia on Syria. What more can Trump do on that?
Well, I don't think Kerry tried too much, or maybe he did, but the Ministry of Defense was not cooperative at all. So there was probably some disagreement between the State Department and the Defense Department. What can he do? We can cooperate. The two militaries can very fruitfully cooperate on specific targets to hit in Syria or in Iraq. And there is a possibility for a joint operation against terrorism, which is possible. Ukraine, I think Trump understands some realities there. And the reality in the Crimea is that 96% of Crimeans decided to secede from Ukraine after the unconstitutional coup, and they like to be part of Russia. And this is a reality which cannot be changed by any foreign power or any foreign will.
Are you expecting him to let you get away with it? I guess is what I'm asking. Do you expect him to wipe the slate clean and to you to carry on in Crimea and not have to pull out and desist from eastern Ukraine?
We do not need any recognition of the Crimea. Crimea is just a part of Russia by the will of its own people. And of course, there are people living in eastern Ukraine, and they will decide their fate, not Donald Trump or anyone else.
Do you expect his help in tempering the West demands, the NATO demands and the EU demands, and the removal of sanctions over the Ukraine and Crimea issues?
If America has a will to lift sanctions, they will be lifted by the European Union next day. But being a businessman, he understands too well that these sanctions are harmful, and not just for the Russian economy, they're also harmful for the European economy and for the American economy.
Let me ask you finally, you have been blamed by American intelligence agencies, by people who are experts in the tech and hacking sector of society, for trying to interfere one way or another with the election process, whether or not on behalf of one candidate, but definitely to undermine the legitimacy of the American democratic process, brand America, so to speak. How are you going to lay that to rest?
Well, we still think America is a great power. It's not a banana republic, and no foreign force can really undermine American democracy or the image of American democracy internationally. So I think you should decide whether Russia is a regional power with the economy in shambles, or it's a great power which puts its, nominees for the U.S. presidency and influence the outcome of the election and the fate of American democracy. I don't think Russia is that powerful. But if you think we are, probably we should start speaking in equal terms.
I read you loud and clear, Mr. Nikonov. Thank you very much indeed for joining us tonight.
Thank you.